My name is Claire Donovan, and if you had told me a year ago that $11 million would nearly cost me my life, I would have laughed in disbelief. But sometimes life delivers its most brutal lessons in a single heartbeat. One moment you're dreaming of freedom, the next, you're staring at death. I was 35 years old when I learned that my estranged uncle had left me his entire estate. $11 million. For a girl who grew up clipping coupons, working double shifts just to keep the lights on, that number wasn't just big, it was impossible. It was the kind of fortune that could rewrite every struggle silence, every overdue bill, and turn years of sacrifice into a future of choice. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual that afternoon, my mind spinning with what this money could mean. My husband Daniel had been chasing his art career for years, and I had carried the weight of our bills on my shoulders. Suddenly, I imagined us free of debt, living in a house with wide porches and sunlight in every room. Maybe even a family. $11 million meant hope wrapped in possibility. The rain had just begun when I merged onto the interstate. It wasn't heavy, just a mist that glazed the asphalt and made the headlights ahead shimmer. I tapped the radio dial, some upbeat song filling the car as I rehearsed how I would tell Daniel. I thought about the watch I had picked up on the way home, tucked in its velvet box beside me. A gift for him, symbolic of time, finally on our side. Then everything fractured. A semi-truck 2 lanes over lurched sideways like a beast breaking its chains. I saw its trailer whip across the highway, a pendulum of steel and momentum bearing down on me. For one surreal second, I believed I could outmaneuver it, jerk the wheel, find a gap, cheat fate. But fate was faster. The impact was thunder. Metal shrieked, glass shattered, and my body became a rag doll flung through chaos. The airbag detonated against my chest, stealing my breath. I caught one last glimpse of that watch box, bursting open, the glint of polished steel sliding across the dashboard in slow motion before the world collapsed into blackness. When awareness returned, it wasn't gentle. It was pain, sharp, unrelenting pain that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. I smelled antiseptic, heard the monotonous beep of a monitor, felt the heavy weight of bandages and pins anchoring me to the bed. My first instinct was to call for Daniel. My second was to realize my mouth could barely form the sound. A nurse's face leaned over me, calm, professional, but her words cut deeper than my broken bones. I had been unconscious for 2 days, and Daniel, he hadn't been there, not once. That realization struck harder than the truck, because money, for all its promise, couldn't buy loyalty, couldn't buy love. It was in that sterile hospital room, staring at a ceiling too white and too far away, that the truth began to whisper. Survival wasn't just about my body mending. It was about finding out why the man I trusted most had abandoned me in the moment I needed him most. And that was only the beginning. The 3rd day in the hospital, I gathered enough strength to reach for my phone. My fingers were clumsy, swollen from IV lines, but the need to hear Daniel's voice burned hotter than the pain. I dialed. The ring went on forever, each tone slicing deeper into my ribs than any broken bone. Then finally, his voice sharp, impatient, unrecognizable. "Claire, I'm busy. What do you want?" I froze. For days I had imagined his relief, his concern, the rush of footsteps down sterile hallways to my side. Instead, his tone was colder than the steel pins holding my leg together. "I was in an accident," I whispered. "The truck, I almost died." A pause long enough to fracture my hope. Then his reply, "You're always so dramatic. I can't do this right now." The line went dead. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my body trembling, not from pain, but from disbelief. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of shared dreams and shared debts, and that was all I was worth. A brush-off, as if my survival was an inconvenience to his schedule. The nurse, a kind woman named Rachel, found me an hour later. My pillow was damp with tears I hadn't realized I shed. She squeezed my hand, no words, just that steady warmth that strangers sometimes give when family fails. That night, the hospital felt like a mausoleum. Machines beeped rhythmically, like a funeral march. My mind replayed Daniel's voice colder with each echo, until finally something inside me broke. Not my bones this time, but the illusion of who I thought he was. The next morning I tried again. Texts, voicemails, pleas. Each went unanswered. By evening, desperation turned into anger. I logged onto social media using Rachel's tablet, half hoping to see some evidence that Daniel was simply overwhelmed, maybe avoiding me out of fear. But the truth I found there made my blood run cold. He had checked in at an art gallery downtown, laughing, drinking champagne with the caption "New Beginnings." My accident wasn't even a week old. My body was stitched and pinned together, and my husband was celebrating a new chapter without me. I felt the air thicken, my chest tighten. New beginnings. Did he mean without me? Did he mean because of me? I stared at the glowing screen until the nurse gently pried it from my hands. "You need rest," she said. But her eyes held pity, the kind you give to someone you know is already broken. That night, I made a promise to myself. If Daniel thought I was fragile, powerless, or too broken to fight, he was wrong. Pain had carved something new into me, steel in my spine, fire in my blood. And while I didn't yet understand why he had abandoned me, I knew one thing with certainty: I would find out. But before I go deeper into how this betrayal unraveled, let me ask you, because I know stories like mine don't just exist in novels or on screens. Have you ever been abandoned when you needed someone most? Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to find silence when you cried out? If you have, tell me in the comments below, because stories of survival aren't just mine, they're ours. And if you want to stand with me as I share the rest of this journey, don't forget to subscribe. 'Cause this is only the first crack in a dam about to burst. As dawn broke through the hospital blinds the next day, I no longer saw myself as a victim lying in a bed. I was a survivor sharpening her questions into weapons. And soon, Daniel would have no place left to hide from the answers. The fourth day in the hospital, I asked Rachel to bring me a mirror. My face was mottled with bruises, stitches lined my forehead, and my right eye was swollen purple. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. But what unsettled me most wasn't the scars. It was the thought that Daniel hadn't seen them. He hadn't seen me at all. By the end of the week, my suspicion curdled into dread. Something was wrong, something larger than abandonment. My phone buzzed at last, a notification I clutched like a lifeline. But when I opened it, my stomach flipped. It wasn't a message from Daniel. It was a post. A memorial service announcement. My breath caught as I read the words again and again, celebrating the life of Claire Donovan gone too soon. The date was 2 days ago. My husband had stood before friends and strangers holding a glass of wine and eulogized me as if I were dead. I nearly tore the IV from my arm, rage vibrating through every fractured bone. How dare he? How dare he bury me alive, not just abandon me, but erase me? Rachel came running when she heard the monitor's spike. I shoved the tablet at her hands, shaking. He told them I was dead. Her eyes widened. She sat heavily at the foot of my bed, silence stretching between us. At last she said, "This isn't just neglect, it's a plan." That word plan echoed like thunder in my skull. Suddenly, Daniel's coldness wasn't confusion or grief. It was calculation. If the world thought I was dead, then what did he gain? I begged Rachel to search further. Within minutes, we found more. Photos of him with friends, his arm casually around a young woman at the same gallery. A toast raised high, captioned "To fresh starts." And below that, comments. "So sorry for your loss, Daniel. Glad you found happiness again." I gagged, bile rising, not just from betrayal, but from the realization that everyone believed him. My friends, my colleagues, even distant relatives all mourning me while I lay trapped in a hospital bed. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I wanted to scream, to run to confront him face to face. But the pins in my leg, the ribs bound in tape, the IV humming, it all reminded me I was a prisoner of my own broken body. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say if he dared to walk into my room. I imagined the look on his face when he realized his living, breathing wife had seen through every lie. But he didn't come. Not the next morning, not the day after. By day 7, my fury had hardened into something sharper. He wanted me erased. He wanted me silent. That meant there was something he feared I could reveal. I thought of the inheritance. $11 million. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The ink on my uncle's will was barely dry before a truck slammed me into darkness. Questions coiled inside me like barbed wire. Had Daniel known about the money? Had he orchestrated more than just a cover story? I didn't have answers, but I had fuel. The anger kept me alive, kept me clawing toward clarity. He could hold a memorial, he could clink champagne glasses with strangers, he could pretend I was gone. But I wasn't gone. I was watching, waiting. And soon he would understand that nothing burns hotter than a woman resurrected from her own grave. The morning Rachel wheeled me to the common room for some sunlight, I overheard two nurses talking near the window. They didn't see me at first. Their voices were low, careful, but I caught enough. She looks just like Claire, except younger. My chest tightened. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about her. I asked Rachel straight out, "Who is she?" She hesitated, then told me what she had heard. Daniel had been seen around town with a younger woman, not hiding her, but flaunting her. At first, people thought she was a grieving friend offering him comfort, but the whispers had shifted. They weren't whispers anymore. They were headlines on his social feed, pictures of Daniel smiling in a way he hadn't in years, his arm draped around a woman whose face I could barely process. Her name was Vanessa. The first time I saw her photo, it felt like another collision, another truck slamming me off the highway of my own life. She was 20-something, striking, with dark hair cascading over her shoulders. And there was something about her features, an echo I couldn't place, but couldn't look away from. What gutted me more than her youth or her beauty was the caption under Daniel's post, "To forever." Forever. The word we once whispered under our breath when we had nothing but hand-me-down furniture and second-hand dreams. He had stolen it, repurposed it, handed it to someone else, as if our vows were disposable, recyclable promises. The betrayal wasn't just intimate, it was public. Friends who once toasted our marriage now liked his pictures with her. Neighbors who had borrowed sugar from me were commenting, "So happy you found love again, Daniel." And there I was, alive, stitched together with pins and scars, erased in plain sight. I wanted to scream to the world, "I am still here." But my voice was confined to hospital walls. My body was weak, my evidence blurry, my place in the narrative stolen. He had cast himself as a widower, the tragic artist finding solace in new love. And the world applauded his performance. One night alone in the dark, I replayed every memory of Daniel in my mind, our first kiss at the art exhibit, the way he once painted my face in a series of abstract strokes, our whispered promises to each other when we were too broke to afford rings. I compared those images to the photos I now saw online. His confident grin beside Vanessa, the champagne flutes, the way he seemed reborn in her presence. And for the first time I saw him clearly. He wasn't grieving, he wasn't lost, he wasn't broken. He was free, free of me, free to reinvent himself with a new muse. But freedom built on lies doesn't last. I pressed my palms against the sheets, teeth clenched. I would not give him the satisfaction of breaking me. If he thought a new woman and a fake funeral could bury me, he was wrong. Because the truth has a way of clawing to the surface. And I was ready to dig it out with my own hands if I had to. I whispered into the stillness of the hospital room, a vow meant only for me. "You wanted a ghost, Daniel." Then watch what happens when the ghost comes back to haunt you. The day Benjamin Harrison, my uncle's attorney, finally returned my call. I was still confined to my hospital bed. His voice was steady, but carried an edge of unease. "Claire," he began, "I need to tell you something unusual. Your husband came into my office yesterday." My grip on the phone tightened. "Daniel, why would he?" "He claimed to be your next of kin. He presented documents declaring you deceased. He even tried to access your accounts." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The world tilted again, not with the chaos of an accident this time, but with the raw realization of betrayal calculated on legal letterhead. Benjamin's words spilled out like poison-forged death certificates, a marriage license with another woman's name, even fabricated papers suggesting a distant sister of mine had partial rights to the inheritance. Every detail was designed to erase me and absorb the fortune my uncle entrusted to me. My ribs throbbed with every heartbeat, but I barely noticed. Fury coursed through me, hotter than painkillers could ever dull. My husband hadn't just abandoned me, he was actively rewriting reality to steal my life, my name, my future. Rachel, who had been folding linens at the corner of the room, froze when she overheard. "He came here with another woman." I nodded, bile burning my throat. "Her name is Vanessa, the same one plastered all over his social media." Rachel's expression hardened. "That's not love. That's fraud." Fraud. The word was sharp, surgical. It cut through the fog of grief and crystallized my path. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was a heist. That night, I stared at the shadows crawling across the hospital ceiling, piecing together the fragments of his scheme. Daniel hadn't stumbled into betrayal, he had orchestrated it. The fake memorial, the sudden marriage, the forged paperwork. Every move was a brushstroke on a canvas he thought would hang in silence. But I wasn't silent. The thought burned through me. If he could convince a court, a gallery, even my closest friends that I was dead, then what else was he willing to do? The inheritance wasn't just tempting, it was enough to justify burying me alive in the eyes of everyone I once trusted. I clenched my fists until my nails cut half moons into my palms. The man I had loved for 7 years was gone if he had ever truly existed. In his place stood a predator, cloaked in grief, weaponizing paperwork and sympathy. That was the night survival shifted into something sharper. I didn't just want to live, I wanted the truth laid bare, his mask torn away in front of the same crowd he had fooled. But before I move forward, let me pause here and turn the lens on you. If you were in my place, strapped to a hospital bed watching your spouse forge your death certificate, what would you do? Would you confront him head-on, or would you build a trap and wait for him to step into it? Tell me in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who has stared betrayal in the face and wondered how far someone would go. I'll tell you what I did. I chose patience, I chose precision, I chose to fight not with broken bones, but with strategy. Because if Daniel wanted to stage a performance, I was about to become the audience he never expected, the one with the power to end the show. The night after Benjamin confirmed Daniel's fraud, my hospital room became a war room. My body might have been caged in steel and stitches, but my mind was sharpening like a blade. I had no intention of letting Daniel script the rest of my story. If he wanted me erased, then he needed to know ghosts don't go quietly. Rachel closed the blinds, her face lit only by the glow of the small tablet balanced on her knees. "If he's bold enough to forge your death certificate, he'll come here eventually," she said. "And when he does," I whispered, "I'll be ready." That's when Benjamin leaned forward, his briefcase snapping open like a vault. Inside was a compact camera small enough to hide in the folds of a curtain or the shadow of a monitor. He placed it in my hands gently, as if it were a weapon. "We'll record everything," he explained. His words, his actions. "If he tries to pressure you into signing anything, it will be evidence." I stared at the tiny lens, heart pounding. A camera. My salvation would not come through shouting, not through begging friends to believe me, it would come through cold, undeniable proof. Rachel helped secure the device in the corner, angled just right to capture my bed and anyone who dared approach it. She brushed my hair back and whispered, "Look frail when he arrives. Let him think he's won." Her words sank into me like armor. Pretend weakness to expose his strength. That was the game. But strategy doesn't erase fear. That night I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway, every squeak of a nurse's shoes made my pulse spike. Would he come in the middle of the night, dressed in false sorrow, ready to feed me more lies? Or worse, would he come with something stronger than lies? By dawn, exhaustion pulled me under, but my dreams were jagged. Daniel's face morphing into a mask of sympathy, then baring teeth. When I woke, Rachel was at my bedside squeezing my hand. "He'll come," she said, not as comfort, but as fact. I nodded, more steel in me now than fear. "Then I'll be waiting." But let me pause here and ask you, because stories like mine are never just about me. If you had one chance to trap the person who betrayed you, would you risk it? Would you play weak? Let them step closer, just to catch their lies on tape? Tell me below, because I want to know how far you'd go for the truth. The plan was simple: bait and watch. Benjamin would remain hidden during the meeting. Rachel would stand nearby, ready to intervene if Daniel grew dangerous. And me, I would play the broken wife, confused, weak, compliant. Inside, though, I was none of those things. Inside, I was fire. As the clock ticked toward afternoon, every second stretched taut. I imagined Daniel rehearsing his lines somewhere, choosing the suit he thought looked most concerned husband, practicing his hand on my arm, his eyes full of false grief. But he didn't know the stage was wired. He didn't know this time the audience wasn't fooled. And as the knock finally echoed on my hospital door, my heart didn't collapse, it surged. Because this wasn't his show anymore. It was mine. The door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside like a man entering a funeral he'd carefully planned. His suit was dark, his tie neatly pressed, and in his hands was a small bouquet of lilies. My favorite once upon a time, now soured by the stench of manipulation. He smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was calculation. "Caroline," he whispered, voice heavy with feigned grief. "You look so fragile. I came as soon as I heard." I forced my lips into a weak curve, my eyes half closed, as if even holding them open drained me. The camera's tiny red light blinked in the corner, unseen by him, but pulsing in my chest like a second heartbeat. "Daniel," I rasped, letting the syllables stumble as though I were barely tethered to life. "Why, are you here?" He set the flowers on the side table and pulled up a chair, leaning in with an actor's gravity. Because I love you, Caroline. Because I want to take care of everything. All this stress, all this confusion, it isn't good for you. From the hallway, I caught the shadow of Rachel's frame. She was close, a silent sentinel reminding me I wasn't alone. Daniel lowered his voice. I spoke to the doctors. They say you might not remember everything. Head trauma can do that. But don't worry, I've brought the documents you wanted to sign before the accident. Your will, your business transfer, it'll make things so much easier for both of us. His hand slipped into his briefcase. I saw the corner of a folder crisp, eager to erase me with ink. My stomach twisted, but I steadied my breathing. I had to keep him talking. Proof was in his arrogance. Documents, I asked softly, tilting my head with practiced confusion. Yes, his eyes gleamed. It's what you wanted, remember, to make sure I'd handle things if something happened. He slid the papers across my lap along with a pen. His hand lingered, pressing just enough to look affectionate, but I felt the weight of control. Go on, he urged, smile sharpening. Sign and then rest. Let me carry the burden. I stared at the lines of legal jargon swimming before me. He thought I was too weak to notice the theft buried in clauses. He thought his performance was flawless. But his every word was being etched onto a memory card. Every false promise. Every push. My hands trembled deliberately as I lifted the pen. Daniel leaned closer, his breath hot, his tone soothing like poison in honey. That's it, just a signature. No one will doubt your wishes. And then he said the words that sealed him. After all, Caroline, it will be easier to finalize everything once your estate is settled. There it was, an admission dressed as compassion, a slip of his tongue revealing the grave he'd already dug for me. I looked up at him through heavy lashes, forcing a whisper. You'd take care of everything? Of course, he replied, confident, eager. I always do. The pen hovered, my hand shaking, but not from weakness anymore. From rage held still by strategy. I let the tip scratch the page just enough to give him hope before pausing. Daniel, I said, my voice steadying just enough to cut. What happens if I don't sign? His face flickered. For a moment, the mask cracked. Anger flared in his eyes, raw and unfiltered, before he pulled it back behind a smile. You wouldn't do that, he said too quickly. Not after everything I've done for you. And in that crack, the camera saw it all, the predator behind the performance. Pause with me for a second. Because right here at this razor's edge, I want you to imagine yourself in my place. Would you have the strength to play along, to let the villain reveal himself while pretending to be weak? Or would you snap, call him out, and risk losing the proof? Tell me in the comments, because your answer might reveal more about you than you think. As Daniel waited, my silence became its own weapon. He shifted, uncomfortable. For the first time, I wasn't the one trembling. The trap was closing. He just didn't know it yet. The silence between us stretched like glass, thin, fragile, ready to shatter. Daniel's smile remained, but the edges had hardened. He thought he had me cornered, that a few shaky breaths and a trembling hand were enough to break my will. What he didn't realize was that weakness was now my greatest disguise. I let the pen fall onto the papers with a faint clatter, my voice trembling just enough to keep him leaning closer. Daniel, I don't understand. Why now? Why are you so insistent? His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Because, Caroline, you're vulnerable. And it's my job, my duty, to protect what's ours before someone else takes it. I'm the only one who truly knows what you want. The words coiled in the air, oily and smug. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I forced my face to soften, to look like a woman clinging to the last branch of trust. And if I don't remember wanting this, I asked, my tone a whisper, wrapped in doubt. His mask cracked again. Anger flashed in his gaze before it retreated into feigned patience. Then let me remind you, his hand reached out, covering mine on the paper, pressing harder this time. Sign it. Everything will be taken care of. The camera blinked red in the corner, swallowing every word. But this time I didn't just play weak. I leaned into him, my eyes meeting his, my voice low, but sharp enough to cut. You sound like a man rehearsing his inheritance, not saving his wife. For the first time, Daniel froze. His breath hitched. His eyes darted too quickly toward the corner where the camera hid. Not enough to spot it, but enough for me to know he feared being exposed. I pulled my hand away, letting the papers slide onto the floor. If I were really dying, Daniel, wouldn't your first instinct be to hold me, to beg me to fight, not to shove legal forms in my lap? His jaw clenched and his voice dropped its pretense. You don't understand what's at stake. Oh, I do, I whispered. Finally, I do. Rachel's shadow shifted in the hall, ready to storm in if things turned violent. but I held up a hand, subtly signaling her to wait. This was my moment, my chance to drag him into the light. Daniel leaned forward again, voice tight. Caroline, don't make this harder than it has to be. You sign, you rest, and no one gets hurt. The phrase hit me like ice. No one gets hurt, not a promise, a threat, and it was all on tape. I feigned another tremor, clutching the blanket around me. Then you'll really take care of me, I asked softly. Of course, he said quickly, too quickly. You're my wife. The lie tasted bitter in the air. That's when I shifted the weight of the conversation. I leaned back against the pillows, eyes glassy, voice steadier now. Daniel, do you remember our wedding vows? You said in sickness and in health? Funny. I never heard you say in fraud and in death certificates. His eyes widened. For a second he looked less like a grieving husband, and more like a man caught in a snare he'd set for someone else. And that's when I knew I had him. The camera had everything, the coercion, the threats, the greed bleeding through every word. I didn't need to sign anything. He had already written his own confession, but I wasn't finished. I let my voice soften, almost playful, despite the storm inside me. You know, Daniel, stories like this don't end the way men like you expect. The weak wife doesn't fade quietly. She learns to sharpen silence into a blade. He blinked, unsure whether I was delusional or dangerous. That flicker of uncertainty was all I needed. I smiled faintly, and I'm not signing a damn thing. The words hung in the room, heavy, final, irreversible. Daniel's face hardened, rage barely contained. But in that moment, I wasn't afraid. I was in control for the first time since the accident. And though he didn't know it yet, his empire built on lies had just begun to collapse. The papers lay scattered on the floor like broken promises, and for the first time since he walked into that sterile hospital room, Daniel had no script to lean on. His face twisted. Not grief, not love, but raw irritation. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, recalibrating his performance, now that the fragile, helpless wife he expected had turned into a mirror reflecting his own corruption. He bent down slowly, deliberately gathering the papers as if each sheet was a lifeline slipping away. Caroline, he said, his voice quieter now, more dangerous. You don't know what you're doing. Refusing me will only make things worse for both of us. I forced myself to keep my breathing even though my pulse was a storm. Worse for me, I asked softly, or worse for you? His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. For a heartbeat, the air was thick enough to choke on. This was no longer a husband's plea. This was a man cornered, and cornered men lash out. You've always trusted me, he pressed, his words clipped precise. And I've always taken care of you, but right now you're confused, weak, vulnerable. That's why I'm here, to protect what's ours before vultures circle. His phrasing wasn't love, it was ownership, possession, and the camera recorded every syllable. I leaned back against the pillows, letting my silence sting him. People like Daniel hate silence. It forces their lies to echo louder. He shifted in his chair, drumming his fingers on the armrest, every tap a sign of the mask slipping further. You think you're strong enough to fight me? He said finally, his tone sharp. Do you have any idea what happens if you go against me, lawyers? Courts. Everyone will say you're unstable after the accident, that you can't remember straight. No one will believe you. His words landed heavy like stones on my chest. But I kept my voice calm. I don't need them to believe me, Daniel. I just need them to hear you. For the briefest second, his eyes flickered toward the blinking red light in the corner. My stomach clenched. Had he seen it? No, not fully, just a suspicion. But suspicion is enough to plant fear. I shifted my gaze to the flowers he had brought, those lilies once meant to be symbols of devotion. Now they looked like funeral arrangements waiting for my signature. Tell me something, Daniel, I murmured. If I'd signed, what would you have done next? Sat back and waited for me to die. He didn't answer, but his silence was louder than truth. I leaned forward, my voice steadier than ever. You keep saying this is for us, but it's always been for you. Haven't you realized, Daniel? You've already lost me. You lost me the moment greed mattered more than love. His jaw tightened, fists curling against his thighs. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who had once held my hand, but as a predator, realizing the prey had grown teeth. The air between us was electric. Every second stretched like a rope pulled taut, ready to snap. And here's where I'll leave you hanging, just like I left him. Because I want you, the one listening right now, to imagine what comes next. What would you do if the person you trusted most revealed they were plotting your downfall? Would you run? Would you fight? Or would you like me turn their own arrogance into the weapon that destroys them? Tell me below. I'm curious if you'd survive in this game. Daniel finally broke the silence with a chilling smile. You're playing a dangerous game, Caroline, he whispered. I matched his gaze, unflinching. No, Daniel, you are, and you just forgot I know how to win. The room fell still, as though even the walls were holding their breath. The trap was set, the evidence gathered. All that remained was the inevitable snap of truth that would crush him, and deep down I think he finally knew it. The silence lingered after my words, as sharp as broken glass. Daniel sat rigid in his chair, the papers clutched too tightly in his fist. He wanted control, he needed control, but he no longer held it. I did, and he knew it. I let the pause stretch. The longer it dragged on, the more his mask cracked. His jaw worked, his eyes darted, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, a dangerous whisper that carried more threat than comfort. You think you've outsmarted me, he said, leaning forward, but you're just a woman clinging to delusions. No one will take your side. Not your doctors, not your friends, not the courts. You're alone, Caroline, and I'm the only lifeline you've got. I forced myself not to flinch. Instead, I met his gaze and said evenly, funny. You call yourself my lifeline, but you sound more like the rope tightening around my neck. That landed. His composure faltered, his hand twitching against the armrest. For the first time, I felt his fear seeping through the cracks of arrogance. And that was when Rachel moved. She'd been in the hallway listening, waiting for my signal. Now she stepped into the room, her phone in hand, recording every syllable. The shock on Daniel's face was priceless. What is this? He snapped, rising to his feet. Insurance, Rachel said coolly. The kind you can't forge or burn. His eyes darted between us, me weak in bed, Rachel standing tall with unshakable resolve, and the camera light blinking in the corner. For the first time, Daniel realized he was surrounded, outnumbered, and cornered. You can't use that, he spat. It's illegal. It won't hold up in court. Rachel didn't flinch. Maybe not in court. But public opinion. The board of directors. Your partners who care more about reputation than law, they'll eat this alive. Daniel froze, and I saw the calculation flicker in his eyes. He was weighing his options, rage, denial, or retreat. But retreat was never in his nature. Men like him don't step back, they push harder. He straightened his jacket, forcing calm back into his voice. You don't know the damage you're doing, Caroline. If this gets out, it won't just ruin me. It will ruin you too. Everything you've built, everything you've dreamed, it all collapses with me. I let his words hang in the air before answering. If protecting myself ruins you, then maybe you never deserved what you built in the first place. Rachel's phone caught every word, every flicker of fear, every ounce of venom he tried to disguise as concern. Then came the shift I'd been waiting for, the mistake predators always make. Daniel leaned closer, his voice raw, losing its polish. I've sacrificed too much to let you destroy me. If I have to drag you down with me, I will. The threat was out, spoken clear, undeniable, and captured on 2 cameras from 2 angles. Rachel gave me a slight nod. We had him. Inside, my body shook from the weight of it all. But I kept my face steady, my eyes locked on his. You just signed your own papers, Daniel, and you didn't even need a pen. For the first time, he had no comeback, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. My fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming power, about proving that even when broken, I was not disposable. I turned my head toward Rachel and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "It's time to end this." The tension in the room felt like thunder before a storm. Daniel wasn't finished, not yet, but neither was I. And as Rachel's finger hovered over the button to send the video out into the world, I knew the next move would decide everything. Would Daniel lash out in desperation, or would he crumble under the weight of his own lies? Either way, the trap had sprung, and there was no way back. Daniel's face turned red, veins pulsing at his temples. For a moment, I thought he might actually lunge across the room. The calm, polished husband who used to charm everyone at cocktail parties was gone. What stood before me now was raw rage, wrapped in a tailored suit. You set me up, he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. Both of you. After everything I've done, this is how you repay me. Rachel's phone stayed steady in her hand, the lens catching every frantic twitch of his face. Her silence was deliberate. She knew the less she said, the more space he had to bury himself deeper. I kept my tone soft, steady, a contrast to his growing chaos. No, Daniel. You set yourself up. We just stopped pretending. That was when he snapped. He slammed his hand against the edge of the hospital bed so hard that the tray rattled and the vase of lilies toppled over, spilling water across the floor. The sound was deafening in the sterile room, the kind of sound that makes your bones ache. "You think anyone will believe this?" he shouted, his voice rising to a near roar. "They'll see a bitter wife and her meddling friend trying to take down a man who sacrificed everything for them. You're nothing without me." The words echoed, bouncing off the walls like accusations that couldn't find a target. He was unraveling piece by piece, and Rachel caught it all. "Funny," Rachel said finally, her voice as calm as steel. "I think you just proved everything she's been saying." Daniel's eyes darted frantic, like a cornered animal searching for an exit. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair, muttering curses under his breath. For the first time he looked small, not powerful, not dangerous, just desperate. Then his eyes locked on me again, and I felt the storm shift. His voice lowered, trembling but sharp. "If you send that video, Caroline, you'll regret it. I'll drag your name through every courtroom, every headline. You won't survive it. You'll be remembered as a paranoid, unstable woman who destroyed her own family." My hands shook under the blanket, but I didn't let him see it. Instead, I said, "If surviving means living under your thumb, then maybe destruction is freedom." The sentence hit him like a blow. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, Daniel Blackwood, the man who always had a line, always had a mask, was speechless. And then came the most dangerous moment of all. He stepped closer, leaning over me, his breath hot with rage. "Do you really think you've won? This isn't over. It'll never be over." Rachel took a sharp step forward, her phone raised high. "Back up, Daniel. Every word you say digs your grave deeper." He froze, and I swear the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. His chest heaved, his fists clenched and unclenched. Finally, with a guttural sound, he shoved the chair aside and stormed toward the door. The slam echoed like a gunshot. Rachel exhaled hard, lowering her phone. For the first time in what felt like hours, I let my body shake, the adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. She came to my side, squeezing my hand. "He's finished," she whispered. "He doesn't even realize it yet, but he's finished." I nodded, though my chest still felt tight. "He won't go quietly," I murmured. "Men like him never do." Rachel's eyes hardened. "Then we'll make sure when he fights against his own shadow." Her words comforted me, but deep inside I knew Daniel's rage wouldn't fade. It would grow fester and return with a vengeance. And when it did, we would have to be ready. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his downfall. But for the first time since the accident, I felt something bloom inside me, strength. A fragile but undeniable strength. And with Rachel by my side, I wasn't afraid anymore. The game had shifted, and Daniel wasn't the only one who knew how to win. The morning after Daniel's eruption, the war began in earnest. I should have expected it. Men like him don't lick their wounds, they weaponize them. By sunrise, Rachel's phone was buzzing non-stop with notifications. "Look at this," she said, thrusting the screen in front of me. Headlines, dozens of them. CEO's wife battles delusion after tragic accident. Blackwood family in crisis, friends report erratic behavior. Each one dripped with carefully planted venom. Daniel hadn't wasted a second. I scrolled further, my stomach tightening with every swipe. Social media accounts, anonymous but suspiciously coordinated, painted me as unstable, ungrateful, even dangerous. The narrative was clear. Caroline Blackwood was unraveling, and Daniel, the devoted husband, was standing by, saintly and long-suffering. I almost laughed. It was brilliant in its cruelty. He'd always been a master storyteller. Now he was writing me out of my own life. Rachel paced at the foot of my bed, her mind working faster than her steps. "This is a smear campaign. He's buying headlines, feeding journalists, running the oldest playbook there is." "But Caroline..." She stopped, meeting my eyes. "He slipped last night. We have his threats, his rage. And now we play our hand." My pulse hammered. The footage on her phone was powerful, yes. But Daniel was rich, connected, untouchable. I wasn't naive. I knew public opinion could be swayed, but could it withstand the force of his empire? That was when Rachel leaned close, lowering her voice as though the walls might listen. "We don't release it yet. Timing is everything. We let him build his house of lies higher and higher. And then when everyone is watching, we pull the bottom out." Her confidence was contagious. For the first time since the accident, I felt like I wasn't simply reacting. We had strategy. Still, the backlash hurt. Friends stopped calling. Acquaintances unfollowed me. Even distant relatives sent cryptic texts that felt more like warnings than comfort. The isolation was suffocating. Daniel's shadow loomed everywhere, whispering poison into ears too willing to listen. Late that night, as I scrolled through the wreckage of my reputation, Rachel placed a hand over mine. "Caroline, look at me. You're not alone, and you're not powerless." This she lifted her phone. "The video file glowing on the screen is a weapon, but the real power is in your voice. When the moment comes, you'll tell your story, and no smear campaign will silence it." Her words sank deep. And I realized something for years I'd lived in Daniel's story. His success, his narrative, his control. But maybe Rachel was right. Maybe it was time to write my own. The next morning, Daniel made his boldest move yet. A glossy interview appeared on a national network painting him as the grieving husband, fighting to save his fragile wife. He sat there in a tailored navy suit voice, breaking at all the right places, hand pressed dramatically to his chest. "She's been through so much," he said, eyes glistening with fake sincerity. "I only want to protect her even when she can't see what's best for herself." I nearly threw the remote across the room. Rachel only smirked. "Perfect," she whispered. "He's overplaying it. People love a sob story, sure, but they hate being lied to even more. When the cracks show, they'll turn on him faster than he can imagine." And she was right. If last night was the storm, this was the calm before the real lightning struck. But there was another realization brewing in me, one that sent chills down my spine. Daniel wasn't just fighting for reputation, he was fighting for survival. And a man with everything to lose is the most dangerous kind. That's when Rachel leaned in, her voice fierce with determination. "We're not just exposing him, Caroline, we're ending him. For good." I nodded, though my chest ached with fear and anticipation. Because I knew the moment we pressed send, there would be no going back. And in that moment, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the end. I was ready for it. It was almost laughable how quickly the tide seemed to turn in Daniel's favor. For a week straight, he dominated headlines. Articles praised his resilience, opinion columns painted him as a tragic hero, and his PR team pumped out carefully staged photos. Daniel visiting charities, hugging children, looking every bit the devoted husband, standing by a struggling wife. The world was swallowing his performance whole. But beneath the surface, cracks were spreading, and I could feel it. Rachel caught the first one. She leaned over her laptop one night, eyes narrowing. "Listen to this," she said, playing back a clip from one of his interviews. Daniel was asked about the night of my accident, and for a moment, just a flicker, his story shifted. He said he was at the hospital earlier than he'd claimed before. A small slip easily overlooked by the casual viewer. But to Rachel, it was blood in the water. "He's lying under pressure," she murmured. "And liars can't keep their timelines straight forever." Still, Daniel wasn't stupid. He had years of practice, a lifetime of manipulation polished into an art form. One inconsistency wasn't enough to topple him. But then came the betrayal, the kind no empire can withstand. A whistleblower. It started with an anonymous email Rachel received at midnight. The subject line was simple: "You don't know the half of it." Inside were documents, spreadsheets, bank transfers, memos, proof of financial manipulation, backdoor deals, even funds funneled through shell companies. And the sender claimed to be someone from inside Daniel's empire. Rachel stared at the screen, her hand covering her mouth. "Caroline, this is it. This is the beginning of the end." I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or terror. If Daniel realized someone close to him had betrayed him, he would burn down everything in his path to find the traitor. The next day, the cracks widened. A journalist reached out directly to me, not Daniel, with a quiet message. "We've received evidence. Off the record, are you ready to talk?" Rachel's eyes gleamed, but she tempered her excitement. "Not yet," she whispered. "We need to control the release. If we jump too soon, he'll crush the story before it breathes." I tried to sleep that night, but every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Daniel hadn't come to the hospital again, but his absence was more frightening than his presence. Silence from him meant strategy, and strategy meant danger. Then Rachel gave me the tease, the glimpse of what was coming. She leaned in, her voice low but electric. "Caroline, you need to understand something. He thinks he's winning. He thinks his little show is working. But what he doesn't know is that his empire is already collapsing from the inside. People close to him are turning. They're sending us proof. And when the truth comes out, the world won't just see him as a liar. They'll see him as a fraud, a criminal." Her words lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. For so long I had been on the defensive. But now for the first time Daniel was the one being hunted. And then Rachel gave me the smile, the one that meant she was holding back the biggest card of all. And Caroline, this whistleblower. They're not just anyone. They're someone Daniel trusts completely, someone he'd never suspect. My heart slammed in my chest. Who, I whispered. Rachel shook her head. Not yet. Timing. When the twist comes, it'll shatter him. And just like that, she opened the loop, dangling the thread that made me ache with anticipation and dread. Because if she was right, Daniel's downfall wasn't just coming, it was going to be brutal. For the first time, I didn't just hope for freedom. I hungered for it. Rachel wasn't bluffing. The whistleblower's identity came out like a blade slicing through the last of my fear. It wasn't some distant accountant or a faceless assistant. It was Daniel's own brother, Jonathan Blackwood. Jonathan had always lingered in the background, the quieter sibling overshadowed by Daniel's charisma. Where Daniel thrived in boardrooms and cameras, Jonathan buried himself in spreadsheets and logistics. For years, Daniel dismissed him as useful but dull. What Daniel never realized was that Jonathan had been watching, and now Jonathan was ready to burn it all down. Rachel handed me a new email at dawn, her voice steady, but her eyes sharp with fire. He's given us everything, she said, sliding the file across the desk. Shell companies forged contracts, bribes hidden in charity donations. Decades of corruption laid out in black and white. Jonathan's tired of being invisible. He wants Daniel destroyed as much as you do. I couldn't breathe. Daniel's own blood had turned against him. But Jonathan wasn't doing this purely out of loyalty to me. His message made that clear. Daniel has robbed me my whole life of credit, of dignity, of a future. I'm not saving you, Caroline. I'm saving myself. If Daniel burns, I rise. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the fortress Daniel built was cracking from the inside. Rachel's eyes gleamed with calculation. This changes everything. Caroline, this is the twist no one will see coming. His own brother, his supposed shadow, stabbing him with the truth. We don't even need to convince the public anymore, the documents will speak for themselves. But even as hope flickered, fear coiled tighter in my chest. Daniel would never forgive this betrayal. He wasn't the type to go down quietly. A cornered predator always lashes out. And lash out he did. By the end of the day, Jonathan's name was trending. Daniel must have sniffed out the leak. News outlets ran stories painting Jonathan as a jealous, bitter sibling, desperate for scraps of power. Daniel unleashed the full weight of his PR machine, turning brother against brother in the public eye. But here was the fatal miscalculation. Jonathan had receipts. At midnight, Rachel showed me the first leak Jonathan released directly to the press. An audio recording of Daniel negotiating a bribe with a city official. His voice was unmistakable, his arrogance unfiltered. The tape went viral within hours. And suddenly the narrative shifted. The man painted as a tragic hero was now caught red-handed, his words replayed millions of times across TV, radio, and every phone screen in America. Hashtags calling for investigation exploded online. Politicians who once smiled beside him were scrambling to distance themselves. I sat in silence, watching the empire collapse in real time. It wasn't victory yet, but for the first time Daniel wasn't untouchable. Rachel leaned back, a rare smile crossing her face. The world's starting to see the man I've always known him to be. The mask is cracking, Caroline, and when it falls, we'll be there to tear it off completely. But her warning followed swiftly after. This is where he's most dangerous. The tighter the trap closes, the harder he'll thrash. He's going to come after you now, harder than ever. She was right. Hours later, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen since the night of the accident. It was Daniel. One word came through in a text message, cold and sharp as steel, traitor. My hands shook as I showed Rachel, but instead of fear, her eyes blazed with defiance. Good, she said. Let him know we're not hiding anymore. Let him know this time he's the one cornered. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't the victim in his story anymore. I was the author of my own. And Daniel's chapter was ending. The twist had been revealed. The downfall was underway. But the final strike, the moment that would seal his fate, was still to come. And deep down I knew it would have to come from me. The end came faster than I ever imagined. After Jonathan's leak, the walls of Daniel's empire caved in on themselves. Politicians distanced, investors fled, and the media that once worshipped him now tore at him like vultures. Every channel ran his voice on repeat, the bribe, the arrogance, the proof. His empire wasn't bleeding anymore, it was hemorrhaging. But Rachel reminded me collapse isn't the same as justice. If you want him gone for good, you have to strike while he's weakest. You have to deliver the final blow. The thought terrified me. For years, Daniel had been the puppeteer yanking every string of my life. Now I had to face him directly, not as a victim, but as his reckoning. So I agreed to do what once felt impossible. I would testify. The courtroom was packed, a suffocating mix of cameras, whispers, and eyes that once looked at me with pity, but now with anticipation. I stood there, my cane steadying me, and spoke truths I'd buried for years. I told them about the manipulation, the control, the threats. About the night of the accident and how Daniel's concern had been nothing more than a performance. But the moment that sealed it wasn't my words. It was Rachel's timing. As I finished, she handed the judge one last file, the one Jonathan had been saving. It contained the ledger of hush payments Daniel made to cover up safety violations in his company. Violations that led to worker injuries, even deaths. The room went still. Daniel's face, once smug, once untouchable, cracked for the first time in public. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. The verdict didn't come that day, but it didn't need to. The world had already chosen. Headlines read, Blackwood Empire collapses, whistleblower, brother exposes truth, Caroline's testimony, breaks silence. For the first time, my name wasn't tied to his shadow, it was tied to my survival, my voice. When the gavel finally fell weeks later, sentencing Daniel to years in prison, I didn't cry, I didn't cheer, I simply breathed, and that was enough. Rachel walked me out of the courthouse, the crowd buzzing with reporters shouting questions. She leaned close and whispered, "You did it. You took your life back." She was right. I wasn't just free of Daniel, I was free of the fear that had defined me for so long. But here's the thing, freedom isn't quiet. It demands to be used. And I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone trapped by someone who told them they had no power. So if you're listening right now, don't just treat this as entertainment. Take it as proof, no matter how big the empire, no matter how powerful the puppeteer, there is always a thread you can pull. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight. Sometimes it comes from allies you least expect, but it's there. And when you tug hard enough, the whole mask shatters. And that's why I keep telling this story. Not because I want to relive the pain, but because someone out there needs to know they aren't alone. Maybe that someone is you. If you've stayed with me this far, don't just leave quietly. Share your thoughts. Tell me what part of this story struck you the hardest. And if you want more stories like this, stories of survival, betrayal, and truth-breaking chains, make sure you're subscribed. Because the next story I'm going to share, it'll shake you even more than this one. As Rachel always said, stories have power. Mine freed me. Maybe yours will free you too. When the dust finally settled, I found myself standing in a quiet place I hadn't been in years. Peace. Not the kind you borrow for a moment or fake with a smile at a family dinner, but the kind that seeps into your bones and reminds you that you've survived. Life didn't magically turn perfect after Daniel's sentencing. Scars don't vanish, and trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But I started to notice small things: walking through my garden without fear, sleeping without nightmares, laughing without guilt. Those little victories, stacked, one after another, became the foundation of something stronger than the empire he tried to cage me in. Rachel often reminded me, freedom isn't about what you escape, it's about what you build afterward. And she was right. For the first time in decades, my story wasn't about him. It was about me, and the choices I got to make without his shadow looming overhead. I began speaking publicly, not as Caroline Blackwood, the name he once claimed, but simply as Caroline. I shared my story in community centers, schools, online forums. Every time someone came up to me afterward and whispered, "That's my story too," I realized the true weight of what I had carried. My survival wasn't just mine, it was a lifeline for others. So if you take anything from this journey, let it be: this power is an illusion when built on fear. Real strength lives in truth, in resilience, in refusing to let someone else write your ending. And maybe if you're standing at the edge of your own story, afraid to take that first step, let mine be the proof that you can. Because the end of my battle wasn't destruction, it was peace. And peace, I promise you, is worth the fight.